Hey everyone, and welcome to part 15 of the top-down shooter tutorial in Godot. In this video, you're going to make something like this, where you can handle player death and be respawned when you die, and where your enemies and your ally units will continue to respawn over time. So we're going to add total respawn mechanics for both of them, for both the AI and the player, and it'll give your game a replayability in the sense that you can keep fighting and keep moving on. So I'm really excited for this one. I hope you are too. As an extra note, we've recently started a community Discord, and it's a great place where if you need help or have questions about a tutorial or just want to talk about some of the things you saw or why decisions were made, it's a great place to ask some of those. So the link to join that Discord server is in the description to this video. So we'd love if you do that, but otherwise, I think we're good to get started on the video. Okay, so it's going to take a fair amount of refactoring of our current map AI node and script to get to the point where we have respawns working the way we want them to. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a unique scene for our map AI. Right now we just had nodes that we added that we attached our map AI script to, but what I'm actually going to do is right click on our ally map AI and do save branches scene, and I'll also just put this in the main here, and I'll just say map AI, call that. And let me delete our enemy map AI for a second here. And then, so if I open this script here, I'll just call this map AI. And I'm going to get rid of both of our ally scenes here. And so we want this to be generic, right? And so a generic map AI is going to need to know a couple things with the way our game is currently set up. It's going to need to know what respawn points it has. So we want our map AI to be responsible for knowing how many units it has and when it needs to respawn and where it should respawn. So our map AI needs to know that. Because we're going to make it a generic scene, our map AI also needs to know which unit it should spawn. Should it spawn our ally or should it spawn our enemy? So we need to have a way to signify that from our main scene or from its parent. And we also need a way to set its team. Because our team node in here is a child of our map AI, if we instance our map AI somewhere else, we're not going to have direct access to it. So we need a way to set which team our map AI is responsible for from our main scene. So those are all things we're going to need to add. And I'm going to do that right now, and then we're going to focus one at a time on each of those three things to get our map AI working and get respawns working. So the first one, and the easiest one, is just how to handle this team right here. So I'm going to come into our map AI script, and I'm going to have another export variable here. And I'm just going to call this export, and I'll do team.teamName. So we want to export what team our map AI should be responsible for, so we can just set it from our main scene. And even though that's an export variable on our team scene itself, we won't have access to it, like I said, so we'll just do it here, and this will be team name. Okay, so now we're actually going to pass in our team name. Now we need to actually set that team on our team itself. So I'm just going to do that in our initialize function here. We could do it in the ready since it's just a child scene, but we'll just do all of our handling kind of in here. So I'll say team.team equals team. I'll actually just, oh, I see. Okay. I'll just call it team name. Team name is actually incorrect because this is an integer. Say team.teamName.neutral. We'll just default it to neutral. So I guess this is not really the best name, but just to differentiate this, instead of having team and team.team and team.team.team or whatever. I feel like just every episode we can't get away from the fact that everything is named team in this game. But anyway, so now we have this, so it's neutral by default, and what we can do here, let me drop our ally map AI, and so I'm just going to instance our map AI twice, and I'm going to call this ally map AI and enemy map AI. So we're going to start slowly recreating what we already had before, but just by doing it in a little bit more reusable way. So our ally map AI needs to be team player, and our enemy map AI needs to be team enemy. Okay, perfect. So, so now we can actually add some handling or add an export variable in to allow our map AI to have each of their own unique units that they will spawn. So What I'm going to do with that in our map AI script here is add another export variable, and then this is going to be a packed scene. And I think we've done packed scenes before. I think we did with bullets, but just as a refresher, packed scenes are saved scenes that you want to instantiate. And with Godot, packed scenes are like freeing and creating new scenes is very quick. It's a lot quicker than other languages because there is no garbage collection, and they're optimized to be created and destroyed a lot quicker than you get in other engines and languages. So not a huge deal to just have a packed scene in here. And so I can say var, we'll just call this unit. I'll set this to be null. And so now I can come over here to our ally map AI and come over to actors, and I can drag our ally scene in here. And our ally scenes already have their team set, so we don't actually need to change anything there. And just drag our enemy into our enemy scenes unit. And so now they'll have that. And so now when we do respawning, we can just spawn whatever scene is that unit that is passed in there. And so that will make it pretty flexible going forward. We could, have a third team with its own type of unit, and it would work just the same way that we have now. So now that we have that, let's actually start building our respawn points. So one thing that's going to be kind of problematic is because we're making this a generic scene, our map AI, we're not going to be able to have like a container within our map AI for our respawn points that we could access directly from our main scene from the engine here, because it won't show us it. So we can't just instance a map AI and then just drag in a bunch of respawn points. And so what we're going to do is just do something similar to what we've done before, and I'm just going to say ally respawn points. So yeah, just make a new node, call it ally respawn points. I'll just duplicate this, make this enemy respawn points. Cool. And so right now, at least, we're not going to need any fancy logic for our respawn points. They're just point 2Ds. They're just a position on our map that people are going to spawn. They don't need any logic. Our map AI is going to handle all of that. So we can just do something really simple here. And I'm just going to say point 2D or position 2D. I always forget those or get those mixed up. So position 2D. And I'm going to hit W for our move mode and drag it over here. So let me just copy these. Let's just make 4 for each team, and you can make these, you can move them wherever you would like. So I'm just going to kind of move those there. Let me move this first one up just to kind of spread them out a little bit. So we'll have 4 spawn points there, and I'll just copy those, whoops, and drag these into our enemy respawn points. Close this out and drag these 4 that are now our enemy respawn points and drag them over here. There we go. Okay, so it's about the same. Let me just move these over here just to make this even. Grab all these, move them a little bit closer. Okay, perfect. So we have 4 spawn points per team on each side. And so what we're going to do is just take, I think we'll probably also do another export variable here like we did with our unit, where we can pass in from the editor some respawn points. It might be better to do that through code. That's what we're doing through our capturable bases. So for instance, we take capturable bases. It's probably actually better to do that. So let's do that for now. We'll do respawn points, which will be an array. Say same here, respawn points. This way, at least it'll be consistent for both of those things. And then we can say self.respawn points equals respawn points. Okay, and so now from our main scene, we're going to need to actually pass those in on initialization. So we get those. I'm also just going to say, so it'd be faster or better to do an onReady variable here, but because we're only going to use this in one spot, like we're not going to use this anywhere else within our main script, I'm just going to get these nodes from within this ready function. So I'll say ally respawns ally respawn points, and then var enemy whoops, respawn, geez, I can't type today, equals enemy respawn points. Okay, and then here we can do ally, oh my good golly, ally respawns and enemy respawns. Okay, so we're getting our respawn points and we're passing them into our AI so that they will have our respawn points. And now we can add handling in here for respawning at one of those points when someone dies. So that's probably what we will do next. So to that point, you'll see within our map AI, in our initialize function, we are at the end calling this check for capturable bases, which in turn, if there is a capturable base, we assign it to our units. The problem now is we have no units, right? So we're going to get to this function and we're not going to get any units. We're going to need to change this logic. But in order to do that, what I want to do is add a new node to our map AI. And this is just going to be another node 2D. And I'm going to call this unit container. And this is just going to be a node that holds all of our units. What it's going to do is allow us to get rid of that kind of gross check we did for if unit equals team. So let me just come down here. I'm going to say onReady var units container and say unit container. And then so here we're going to say units container dot, whoops. That wasn't what I want to do. Unit container dot get children. And we'll say unit here. Now we can get rid of this check because our unit container is only going to have actual units. So solve that. And now we want to, before we do anything with capturable bases, we want to spawn our units. So right here is where we're going to spawn units. So the first thing we're going to need to go through, we're going to need to set like how many units should be alive at one time. So I'm going to do another export variable for that. We probably won't ever change it, but just to have it, and I'll say var max units alive, and we'll set this to be 10. Let's make it interesting. Let's put a lot of units alive at one time. So actually we only have 4 spawns, so let's start with 4 so we don't have to worry about adding logic for having, like, you know, spawning waves or whatever right now. Let's just start with 4. And so what we're going to need to do is at the start spawn the max units alive, oh my, amounts of units, and then make sure that we add those units to the unit container, and that I think is all we're going to need to do right at the start. So before we actually do that, let's just I'm just going to add a check-in in here. This is something I do a lot when I'm making games, just to prevent myself from forgetting to do what I'm expecting me to do, which is to do something like if capturable bases dot size equals 0 or respawn points dot size equals 0. So if we forget to actually pass in something, or it's doesn't actually have any respawn points or bases, I'd even do like or unit equals null here. So like if we forgot to set a unit, just return. And this way, like, and what I'll do is also say push error. And what push error does, as opposed to print, is it actually adds to your debugger the errors that you see in here. So this is a really helpful method for that because it'll actually show up red on your debugger when you're running. Say forgot to properly initialize our map AI. So like I said, I just like to do that sometimes. It helps you give yourself better error messages when you forget to do something or don't set something up correctly. But now when we get here, we can pretty much assume that our respawn points are good to go. So what I'm going to do is just say for respawn in respawn points dot get children, or whoops, I don't need to do that because it's an array already. So we're going to go through all of our respawn points, and then we're going to spawn a unit at each of those points. So in order to spawn, then we can say var unit instance equals unit.instance. That's what we called it, right? Yeah, unit. So it's a pack scene. So we'll instance our unit, and then we will say unit container dot add child unit instance. So we're going to add our unit instance to our unit container, and then we can say unit instance dot global position equals respawn dot global position. Okay, because our respawn should just be a position 2D. So we're going to go through at the start, and we're not really using our max units alive. Again, for now, just you've probably picked up on this, but there's a lot of complex or cool logic we could do here that we're just not going to cover for this tutorial. Hopefully it'll give you enough that if you want to do smarter respawn stuff, you can do it on your own. But just for the sake of time, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out wave spawning or making sure you're not spawning someone on a point that already has a unit that just spawned, or handling those collisions or anything like that. And so the easiest thing is just to take however many respawn points we have and just spawn all those units, and then we'll just use this number, which we will, for ease of use, set to the amount of respawn points we have. We'll just use that to make sure we're respawning units as time goes on. So again, there's a lot of logic we are ignoring or just kind of hand waving away. That's intentional, just trying to make something that's easy to follow here. But so we should have something now where we are adding all these units to our unit container, and then afterward they're going to be assigned a base. So this should recreate our default spawn. Like, we should have all the functionality that spawns units in that we previously had. So we should be back to where we were before the refactor. Now the only two things we need to tackle are, one, handling the player spawning in, and two, actually handling respawning once you've died. So before we get any farther, let's just make sure what we have works. So if I run this, we get an error. This is in our main scene, and oh yeah, so we changed initialize for our map AI to take an array for our second argument, but we are passing in, if I go to our main scene, we're passing in this whole object. We actually just want the children. We just want those respawn points. So if I do get children here for what we're passing in to both of these map AI initialize functions, get children. Now if I run it, we should see that 4 allies spawn. That first guy just shot right at the start. Not totally sure why that happened, but whatever. And they're still capping that base. So that is good. Let me just make sure that the other team, oh wow, they capped that one quick. Okay, and so the other team also has 4 spawns. So that looks good. Not sure why they missed that middle one. So maybe there's a bug in our logic here, but whatever, not too worried about that right now. But it looks like everything is working and is at the spot where it was previously. Okay, so now that we know we have something that works, let's actually add respawning in. I feel like I've said that 2 or 3 times now, but this time, for real. So let me go to our map AI scene. We're gonna need to first add a timer, and I'll just call this respawn timer. And so let's set this to be 3 seconds, and I'm gonna set it to be a one-shot timer. And let's just go ahead and connect that timeout function. And let's get a reference to it here. On ready var respawn timer equals respawn timer. Okay, perfect. So what I want to do here, we're going to need to add some changes to our actor script real quick. But before we do that, basically what I want it to do is whenever an actor dies, we start the timer. And then when it times out after 3 seconds, we 1, respawn a unit, and 2, we check to see if our the current amount of active units is less than our max active units, then we start the timer again. So we can add that functionality in here before we forget. So I'm going to say spawn unit. We'll add that function in a sec, and then I'm going to say if let's see, unit container dot get children. So we're going to see how many children we have alive, is dot size. So see how many is less than max units alive. Then we need to say respawn timer dot start. So we're going to just keep starting the timer as long as we don't have enough units. And then I'll say function spawn unit here, which I think we can just pretty much grab. We should probably need to pass in a position here. So we'll say spawn location, which would be a vector 2. And then I can grab this right here, I'm pretty sure. just paste this in here. So I just grabbed our, let's do that. I just grabbed the code that we were using to spawn something up above. And so in our initialize function, so spawn location. So we instance our unit and we spawn it at the spawn location. So here what we're gonna need to do, I'm gonna add another function to get a random spawn. So function, actually let's do it a little bit differently. So up here, this is easy. I can just change this in our initialize function to just be spawn unit, and we can say respawn.global position. And then I'm going to have another variable, and I'm just going to call this last spawn use, which will be an integer, and we'll say 0. And so here, when we do spawn unit, we will say, let's say, oh yeah, okay. So basically my idea with this is we'll just keep track of the last spawn used and keep going to the next one. And that way, if we were to lower our spawn timer to like a second or something, we won't have to worry about overlap because we just keep going through the spawns in order. I think this will be a little bit nicer than just grabbing a random spawn. But either way would work. If you want to just grab a random spawn, totally fine. So what I'm going to do here though is say var respawn is going to see respawn points of, let's just say, what was, oh, last spawn used. So last spawn used. So we're going to get a respawn point of last spawn used. We should call this next spawn to use. Seriously guys, the typing today is so bad. Next spawn to use. Okay, so we're going to do that, and then we're going to spawn at respawn.global position. And then we will say here, next spawn to use plus equals 1 if next spawn to use is equal to respawn points dot size. So if we hit the limit, then next spawn to use equals 0. So pretty simple spawn logic here that we're doing. We're just saying spawn at this next spot, and then keep going through, and if you get to the end, we go back to 0. So this should be enough, I think, unless I'm missing something, to just have the basic stuff in our map AI to keep respawning units after they die. Now what we need to do is just add a signal to our units so that we listen to it when they die and actually start our respawn timer. So that's what we're going to do next. So in order to do that, let's go over to our actor script here. So I'll come into here, and I'm going to add a signal to the top up here and just call this signal died. That's pretty much it. I don't think we need anything else right now. And previously what we were doing upon death was just doing queue free, which is totally fine. But before we do that, we will just emit our died signal here. So come back into our map AI. And now what we can do is whenever we spawn a unit, we can do unit instance dot connect, and then we can say died, and we will handle it with a function in here, and we'll call handle unit death. So let's do that right here. So function handle unit death. So no parameters there, and really all we want to do is just start our respawn timer. So well, actually, caveat to that, we want to restart our respawn, or we want to start our respawn timer if we have less than the max units alive. So pretty much the same here. Actually, pretty much the exact same code that we have here, I think, right? So if we have less units currently active than the max, we want to start our respawn timer. And I think we can also say if respawn timer dot is started. I always forget. Is stopped. Okay. So if our respawn timer isn't currently going and we have less than the max units alive, start it. So it's basically saying if we either already have the max units or it's already in progress, then just do nothing. So it's basically just making sure, hey, we're starting the timer whenever we need to start it. And once the timer's started, because we're continuing to call it over and over again from this timeout, it's going to keep going forward until all the units that need to respawn have respawned. Okay, I think we're pretty much good to try this. One other thing that we're going to need to add real quick though is we're currently not ever setting the next base for our AI units that are spawning. So they're just going to spawn and not ever get the next base assigned to them until something changes with the current bases. So what I think we want to do, right now we're not keeping track of what the current base target is. We are finding it here in get next capturable base, but we're not saving it anywhere. So I think I'm going to have another variable, which I'm just going to call variable target base, and just set that to be null. Is capturable base a? Oh yeah, we did make it a thing. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do then is when we do check for capturable bases, we're basically going to say within this, so if we do find a next base to capture, I'm going to set, get next capturable base. This returns just the position of the base, I believe. So return the base.global position. Cool. Okay. Let's just return the actual base itself. So we'll do get next capturable base, and we'll just set that, make sure it's not null, and then we will say next or target base here, equals next base. So we'll always keep track of what the next base is to attack, and then we're gonna actually assign that base to our units, and we'll say global position. Actually, let's make all of these just take a capturable base, and then we can handle transforming it into a location when we need to. Base dot, this will be global position. I kind of like this better. It's a little bit more flexible. Okay, so the reason we were doing all of that was to make it easier for us to update our AI for our units once they spawn in later in the game and not right at the start. So I think what I want to do is kind of pull some functions out. So I'm just going to add a set unit AI to advance to next base. Oh my, that's a wordy function. Let's just keep it for right now though, just so that we can make good progress here. So basically what I want to do in here is kind of grab the stuff we're doing in here, right? Like get our unit AI, and then set the next base to be our target base dot global position. Let's not worry about making sure that this target base exists. Let's assume that it's actually there. So whenever we spawn a unit, we assume that there's a target base. Actually, maybe we should, let's just do, so if target base does not equal null, doesn't cost us anything to do that check, so might as well. So whenever we spawn a unit, we will set its AI. And then what else, the other thing we want to do, we still need this assign next capturable base to units, because this is what happens whenever a base is captured. So the state of our map has updated. We still want to do the same thing. So set unit AI to advance to the next base. And we're doing that by looping through everything. And then so that's basically going to be that case we were doing before. So whenever, right at the start or whenever a base is captured, we're going to go through and check for capturable bases. I think I want to rename this to check for next capturable base. Check for next capturable base. Just so I think that's a little bit truer to what it's actually doing, right? So at the start or whenever a base is captured, we check for the next capturable base, and if we find it, we set it. And if we set it, we then go through and assign that to each of our units using the same function that we're also using on spawn. Okay, so sorry, that was just a lot of changes, a little bit of refactoring in here, but I think this is going to do what we want it to do, and it's going to set our AI to always be advancing toward the next base, whether they just respawned or they were there right at the start of the game. And so now if we run it, we get, an error. Because so unit is our, we were using that name for like our stored unit that we need to spawn. So I think this needs to take a unit, which is actually an actor. So if we do that, that should work there, and we're already doing basically the same thing up there. So, and we'll do that down here. This will be our unit instance. Okay, there we go. Now if we run it, Okay, so we get 4 units that spawn right at the start, which is great. And they have the correct AI. They're going to the right base, which is good. So we'll let this one cap. We'll let them get it, and let's just make sure that our enemy units, so they spawned in as they should. It still looks like they're missing this middle base, so that must be a new bug that was introduced. But we can fix that in a bit. So I'm assuming some of them are going to die, so we can just wait over here for a minute and make sure that they spawn in, and that when they spawn, they... Oh yeah, there you go. So he spawns in, he spawns in, and it looks like they've got the right AI, so they're instantly advancing to the next base, which I think is our first base. Again, that is problematic, but oh, nice. Well, so it looks like our ally AI is working correctly. Like they're finding the next base, and capturing it. So I'm not totally sure what is going on with our enemy AI, but all that to say, it looks like everything is working here as we want it to. Okay, so guys, this is awesome. This is looking really good. Now there's some replayability because people keep respawning, so it's not just like one wave that crashes into each other and then everyone's dead. The only other thing we haven't tackled as far as respawning goes is player respawn, because this is only going to work right now for our unit or our actors, our AI controlled units. And what we could do is incorporate our player respawn into the same map AI mechanic that we have here, and that's pretty much what you would want to do in an actual game. It definitely would be better to incorporate that into the actual system you built, but the way we have it now is just kind of, it's not super flexible because we are taking in a specific unit to spawn. So I think just for the ease of this tutorial and to get something that works, let's just add special handling for our player to our main scene. So first thing to do, I'm going to go into our player and I'm going to add a died signal, similar to what we did for the actors. Signal died. And then what I'm going to do, we haven't implemented player death this whole time. So I'm going to emit a signal, which will be died, and then I'm going to say queue free. Oh, dangerous. Freeing the player. So now that we've got that, we can come to our main, and then we can say, well, a couple things. One, I'm actually going to change our player to be a constant player, and I'm going to set this to be a preload variable. So we're actually going to load it, we're going to save our player scene and load it in at the start rather than actually always having our player there. Do we need all of these? Capturable base. Okay, so we are using those. So then what I'm going to do is say var player equals player dot instance and then add child player. So our player is going to live right now outside of our map AI. It's not going to count for our ally unit counts. You could do that by just taking our ally unit count and bumping it down one to compensate. So super easy if you want to do that. But yeah, so we're just going to add the player at the start, and you know we could add like a spawn position for this, but what I really want to focus on right now is the camera, because one of the issues we're going to get here when the player dies or gets queued free is that our camera is going to go with it, which is going to cause really weird camera controls. And when we spawn our player, since our player itself has no camera, this camera isn't going to get moved back to it. So what I'm going to do is drag our camera to actually live just in our main scene, and I'm going to add to our player a remote transform. So I'm going to say remote transform. Actually, let's do this within our player scene itself. So we will add a remote transform here, and I'm going to call this camera transform. There we go. And then what we can do is just have a function here, which I'll just say like function, or whoops, func set camera transform. And this is going to be a node, or whoops, camera path, which will be node path. So if you've never used a remote transform before, they're really cool. What it does is it lets you give it a remote transform, which is like position data of another node. So you give it a node path basically, and the remote transform controls the transform of that thing. So previously we got camera follow for free by just making the camera a child of the player. But what we can actually do is assign the camera's transform to our player's remote transform, and it'll automatically handle moving the camera's transform with the player because our remote transform is a child of the player. So a little bit interesting there, but remote transforms are really cool and really useful nodes for almost exactly this situation. There's a lot of places where they are useful, but this is the case where I use them most often. So I'm going to say camera transform in our player script, get our camera transform there. And then what I'm going to do is just say camera transform dot node. What is that called? If I click on this, a remote path. So that's what we want to do. Say remote path equals camera path. Okay, so we just need to, now that we have this function, call it from within our main scene. So if I go back in here, what I'm going to do is just add a function spawn player. I'm actually just going to copy this in here. We'll just say, oops, spawn player when we start our game up. And so we'll add our player as a child. We'll say player.set camera transform, and we will pass in our camera. So I'll say onReady var camera equals camera 2D. So we will say camera.get path. So this get path is going to return the node path. And a node path is just a special type of string in your scene tree that gives you a path to that node. It's basically what happens. It's like using this $sign is shorthand for node path. So we're basically, whenever we spawn a player, we're getting our camera's path and then giving it to our player so that the player can set the camera's transform to the remote transforms remote path. So that's a lot of remote and transform and camera, but hopefully that makes sense. The general gist of what we're trying to do here. Okay, so now that we are spawning our player, we can actually remove our player scene from our main scene because it's going to spawn in dynamically. So we're going to be spawning the player dynamically, but we don't actually have respawn yet. And so what we can do is say player.connect died, and we can say self, and then honestly, we might, this isn't what I was planning on doing, but we might just be able to call spawn player. So whenever we die, we just call this function again and spawn another player instance. This might totally be broken, but it's a little bit, might be easier. So let's just see if it works. Okay, so I'm running the game and everything looks good. We have a player and a node path that still work. And let me go over and find our enemies and let them shoot me and get killed. And we should see if I didn't mess anything up. Oh, there we go. Okay, sweet. So I died and I got sent back over to the start. I am confused why it only took one bullet to kill me. I think, oh, yeah, no duh. So the reason why that happened is because we never actually had a death function. So I'm just going to func die, and here's where we're actually going to do this stuff. So we'll move the queue free and the signal down here, and I'll say if health stat dot dot health, there's no autocomplete, less than or equal to 0. So if we're under, then we'll just say die. And I think that's pretty much what we have for our actor down here. I'm just going to add a death function to our actor. This is not necessary for what we have. It's super not complex, but I'll just do it here anyway. And then we'll have pretty much the same code, for both our actor and our player. We'll say die. Okay, there we go. So if I run it, we should see that I don't instantly get beamed back there whenever I get shot, but I actually have to die first, but then I'll respawn back at the beginning. So this is super cool, guys. We have respawning in. This was kind of the last of our game mechanics that we didn't have. Like, this game can be played now. You've got enemies and allies that will continue to spawn and fight for bases. You can spawn and help them and capture bases, and they'll keep coming. So you can adjust and adapt and make this work as needed. You can adjust how long respawning takes and whatever, but we've got an actual game now, guys, which is super, super cool. And so in the next episodes, again, truly, I do mean this now. I really want to focus on adding UI, adding some terrain, some like tile maps, and show you how to do that. And then hopefully if we've got some time, it'd be cool to add actual pathfinding and fix some of the bugs or small, weirdness, like sometimes the capturable bases shouldn't get captured when they do, etc. So there's still some stuff to work on, but I think we have all the features here, and it's time that we can actually add the polish, which I'm really excited for. So anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. I hope this has been a helpful video. If it has been, I'd love if you could like and subscribe, and feel free to leave any questions or feedback down below. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next video.